The massive space station known as Carveth hung in orbit above a blood-red planet. And inside its gleaming halls walked creatures from 1,000 different worlds, who had come here for one purpose alone, to prove themselves as hunters worthy of legend Marcus. Chun stood in line at the registration office, his worn leather jacket looking out of place among the gleaming armor and exotic weapons carried by the beings around him. And he kept his hands relaxed at his sides, while he waited his turn with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that rushing brought nothing but trouble. The aliens in front of him towered over his average human frame, their bodies covered in scales and fur and chitinous plates that spoke of evolution on worlds far more dangerous than Earth. And they looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt as he shuffled forward in the linear massive creature with tusks longer than his arm laughed and nudged its companion, pointing at Marcus with one clawed finger. "Look at this one," it said in a rumbling voice that shook the air. Another soft-skinned human come to play at being a hunter. The companion, a sleek predator covered in midnight black fur, made a sound of agreement and bared its fangs in what might have been amusement. "They never last long," it replied. "Remember the last one who came through here 3 cycles ago?" "Ah, yes," the tusk creature said with clear delight. "He ran screaming from a Class 2 herbivore and had to be rescued by the emergency wardens." They both laughed loudly, and several other hunters joined in while Marcus simply smiled and said nothing at all. When he finally reached the front of the line, he found himself facing a towering 4-armed female of the Crithian species, her scales shimmering with colors that shifted like oil on water, and her golden eyes looked down at him with barely concealed disdain as she activated her registration terminal, name and species. She demanded in a voice that carried the weight of someone who had processed thousands of applicants and found most of them wanting Marcus. "Chun," he replied in an easy tone. "Human. From Earth?" The Crithian, whose name badge identified her as Executor Veshtari, made a dismissive sound and began tapping at her console with 2 of her 4 hands, while the other 2 remained crossed over her chest. "Human," she repeated as if the word itself was distasteful. "Your species was only contacted by the galactic community 47 standard years ago, and you have no established hunting pedigree whatsoever." Marcus nodded without any change in his calm expression and said, "That is correct." Veshtari continued her work, pulling up forms and documents on her screen while she spoke without looking at him directly. "The Galactic Hunters Guild has existed for over 12,000 years, and in that time we have trained and certified the greatest predators the universe has ever known," she said with obvious pride. "Legends who have slain creatures that could destroy entire cities. Hunters who have tracked prey across multiple star systems. Warriors who have—" "I understand," Marcus interrupted gently. "I would still like to register." The executor's eyes narrowed at being cut off, and she leaned forward with all 4 arms now planted on her desk. "Do you have any idea what happens to those who enter the hunting grounds unprepared?" she asked with a sharp edge to her voice. "The mortality rate for first-year hunters is nearly 30%, and for humans specifically, it approaches." "I have read the statistics," Marcus said, still smiling that easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I accept the risks." Veshtari stared at him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. And when she found nothing but calm patience, she made a sound of disgust and returned to her terminal. "Very well," she said coldly. "Based on your species' complete lack of hunting history, your obvious physical inferiority, and your absence of any documented combat experience, I am assigning you the rank of Novice, the lowest tier in our organization." She stamped his registration papers with unnecessary force and thrust them toward him along with a simple badge that marked him as barely worth noticing. "You will be assigned to a Training hunt on a Class 3. World with other novices, she continued. Try not to get yourself killed on the first day like the last human who came through here. Marcus took the papers and badge with a polite nod. And if the insults bothered him, he showed no sign of it whatsoever. Thank you for your assistance, Executor, he said. And then he walked away to find his assigned quarters while whispers followed him through the crowded hall high above the registration floor. In a room filled with screens showing every angle of the station, 7 figures sat in seats, arranged in a circle, and watched the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. These were the Apex Council, the 7 most legendary hunters in the entire galaxy. And each of them had killed creatures that entire armies had failed to stop. Croanax the Eternal, a massive reptilian predator who had lived for over 600 years, suddenly went very still as one of the screens showed the human walking away from the registration desk. His clawed hand shot forward and froze the image, zooming in on the human's face. And the other council members looked at him with confusion as his scales began to shift from their usual deep green to a pale yellow, the color of alarm. Impossible, Croanax whispered, his ancient voice cracking with something that sounded almost like fear. What troubles you, old one? Asked Sureth, a shadowy hunter whose species could blend perfectly with darkness. He is just another human novice who will wash out within a week. Croanax ignored the question and began pulling up files on his personal terminal, his claws moving faster than anyone had seen them move in centuries. I know this human, he said as data began flooding his screen. I know exactly who he is. And that fool Veshtari has just made a terrible mistake. The other Apex hunters leaned forward with sudden interest as Croanax made an encrypted call, his claws trembling slightly in a way that none of them had ever witnessed before. Who is he? Demanded Zalanix the Bloodless, a cold and calculating hunter who tolerated no secrets among the council. Croanax turned to face his fellow Apex hunters, and his next words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water. That human is Marcus Chun. And 15 years ago, he walked onto Kepler 442, a Class 10 death world, and he walked off again alive, the ancient reptile said with grim certainty. The beings who live in that hellscape call him the Ghost, and he has killed things that would make even us think twice before engaging. Silence filled the council chamber as the implications sank in. And far below them, the human they had just labeled a novice found his quarters and began unpacking his worn but meticulously maintained gear. Hunt had not yet begun, but already the greatest predators in the galaxy were starting to realize that something dangerous had just walked through their front door. The dropship descended through thick clouds of green mist as it carried the novice hunters toward the surface of Novaris 7. And inside the cramped cabin, Marcus sat quietly while his fellow trainees argued about who would lead the expedition. Telex, a young hunter from a prestigious clan whose family had produced 3 Apex-ranked members, stood at the center of the group with his chest puffed out and his voice loud enough to fill the entire ship. My great-uncle killed a void stalker with nothing but a blade and his bare hands, Thalrix announced proudly. And my father brought down a crimson Leviathan on Korath Prime before any of you were even born. The other novices listened with varying degrees of interest and annoyance, though none of them challenged his obvious assumption that he would be in charge of Grotham. A massive bear-like creature covered in thick brown fur sat next to Marcus and watched the boasting with tired eyes. Does your species also have ones like him? Grotham asked in a low rumble meant only for Marcus to hear. Marcus glanced at Thalrix and allowed himself a small smile before answering. Every species has ones like him, he replied quietly. Loud voices often hide uncertain hearts. Grotham made a sound that might have been a laugh and settled back in his seat as the ship broke through the final layer of clouds to reveal the jungle. World Belonovaris 7 was a planet of endless green. with trees that stretched hundreds of meters into the sky and rivers that carved silver paths through the dense vegetation. And from above it looked almost peaceful despite its designation as a training ground for hunters. The ship landed in a clearing, and the novices filed out onto soil that was soft and dark with centuries of fallen leaves. Their instructor, a scarred veteran named Catharus, stood waiting for them with arms crossed and a look of weary resignation on his face. "Listen carefully, because I will only say this once," Catharus announced as the group gathered around him. "Your mission is simple: capture 3 specimens of the local megafauna, known as thornbacks, and return them alive to this location within 5 days." He pointed to the jungle with one massive claw. Thornbacks are Class 3 creatures, large and strong but not particularly intelligent, and they should pose little threat to a coordinated group, he continued. However, this jungle contains many other dangers, so stay together and watch each other's backs. Thalrix stepped forward immediately. "I will lead this hunt," he declared as if there could be no argument. "My experience and training make me the obvious choice." Catharus looked at the young hunter for a long moment, then shrugged with clear indifference. "Leadership is yours to determine among yourselves," he said. "I am only here to observe and report. Your success or failure is in your own hands." With those words, he activated a personal cloaking device and vanished from sight. Leaving the novices alone at the edge of the jungle, Thalrix immediately began issuing orders, assigning roles to each member of the group based on his own assessment of their usefulness. When he came to Marcus, he barely glanced at the human before making his decision. "You will carry the equipment," Thalrix said dismissively. "Your species is weak, but you should be able to manage that much at least." Several of the other novices laughed, but Marcus simply nodded and began gathering the supply packs without complaint. Ratham frowned at the treatment but said nothing, choosing instead to watch the human more carefully as the group set off into the jungle. The first day passed without major incident as they tracked a herd of thornbacks through the dense undergrowth. Alex made constant noise and boasted endlessly about past hunts, while Marcus moved silently at the back of the group with the heavy packs balanced perfectly on his shoulders. Gratham noticed something strange about the human, despite carrying more weight than anyone else. Marcus left almost no tracks in the soft soil and made less sound than hunters half his size when they stopped to rest. The bear-like alien moved closer to Marcus and spoke in a quiet voice. "You move like a shadow," Gratham observed. "Where did a human learn such skills?" Marcus looked up from the water he was drinking, and that easy smile appeared again. "I have spent time in jungles before," he replied simply. "You learn to move quietly, or you learn nothing at all." Before Gratham could ask more questions, Thalrix called for the group to continue moving, and the moment passed by evening. They had cornered their first thornback, a massive creature covered in bony plates with spikes running down its spine. And the capture went smoothly enough, thanks mostly to the work of Syrah and Polka, bonded pair of insectoid hunters whose coordination was flawless. Thalrix claimed credit for the success anyway, and the group made camp as the twin suns of Novice 7 sank below the horizon around the fire that night. The novices shared stories of their homeworlds and their reasons for joining the guild. When Marcus's turn came, he simply said he was looking for something and offered no further details despite the curious looks from his companions. The second day began with confidence as the group tracked another thornback through morning mist that clung to the jungle floor like a living thing. Rix was in particularly good spirits, already planning how he would tell the story of his leadership to impress the guild evaluators. Then everything went wrong. Syrah, scouting ahead with her bonded partner, suddenly froze and made a clicking sound of pure terror. "Back," she hissed urgently. "Everyone back now." But it was too late. The creature that exploded from the undergrowth was nothing like the lumbering thornbacks they had been hunting. It was a nightmare of sleek black chitin and too many limbs, with eyes that glowed with pale blue light and a mouth filled with teeth, designed for one purpose only: Void Stalker. Grotham breathed with horror in his voice. That is impossible. They are not supposed to be on Class 3 worlds. The creature moved faster than any of them could track, and in one terrible instant, it had torn through one of the novices and left nothing but scattered. Remain's screaming erupted as panic overtook the group, and Syrah and Pawk fled into the jungle without looking back, while Thalric stood frozen with his weapon hanging uselessly at his side. The Void Stalker circled the remaining hunters, its movements jerky and predatory as it selected its next target, and two more novices fell wounded as they tried to run in the chaos. Only two figures remained standing, with any composite. Gratham raised his weapon with shaking hands, ready to fight even though he knew it was hopeless against a Class 7 predator, and Marcus the human had dropped the equipment packs. And something had changed in his posture that made Graham's fur stand on end. Gone was the quiet, unassuming man who had carried supplies without complaining. His place stood something else entirely: a predator wearing human skin, with eyes that had gone cold and calculating as they tracked the Void Stalker's movements. "Get the wounded and move north," Marcus said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "There is a rock formation, half a kilometer in that direction, defensible position with only two approaches." Grotham stared at him. "What are you going to do?" he demanded. Marcus drew a simple blade from his belt, nothing fancy, just well-maintained steel, and his lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "I am going to remind this thing why humans learn to hunt in packs," he said. "Now go." Then Marcus Chun moved toward the Void Stalker instead of away from it, and Gratham watched in disbelief as the human who had been labeled a novice began to hunt the apex predator. The Void Stalker was fast, but Marcus had hunted faster things in darker places, and he moved through the jungle with a purpose that would have shocked anyone who had seen him shuffling quietly at the back of the group just hours before. He did not run directly away from the creature. That would have been suicide against something that could outpace any land animal in the galaxy. Instead, he ran at angles, cutting through dense vegetation and leaping over fallen logs while leading the predator exactly where he wanted it to go. The Void Stalker screamed with rage as it pursued him, its multiple limbs tearing through the jungle in a display of terrifying power. But Marcus stayed just ahead of it as if he knew precisely how fast it could move. He had fought these things before on Kepler 442, where the nights lasted for months and creatures far worse than Void Stalkers roamed the frozen wastes. Marcus had learned every weakness of every predator that called that hellscape home. Void Stalkers were ambush hunters, devastating in short bursts but poor at sustained pursuit. Their blue glowing eyes saw heat signatures perfectly, but struggled with rapid movement against complex backgrounds, and most importantly, they attacked from above whenever possible, because their skeletal structure made ground-level combat awkward and slow. Marcus used every piece of this knowledge as he drew the creature deeper into a section of jungle where the trees grew close together and thick. Vines hung from every branch. He grabbed a vine and swung across a gap, then rolled under a fallen trunk and came up running without breaking stride. The Void Stalker tried to follow but found itself tangled in the dense growth, its long limbs catching on vines and branches that seemed to reach for it like grasping hands. It screamed again, louder this time, and Marcus allowed himself a grim smile as he reached the spot he had been heading toward since the chase began. A natural depression in the ground, surrounded by trees with thick roots exposed above the soil, created a space just large enough for what he needed. He stopped running and turned to face the direction of his pursuer. For 10 minutes, he worked with desperate efficiency, using his blade to cut vines and branches, arranging them in patterns that looked random but served a deadly purpose. By the time the Void Stalker finally tore itself free and located him again, Marcus stood in the center of the depression with his blade held ready and his breathing controlled despite the exertion. The creature paused at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on the human with what might have been confusion. Prey was not supposed to stop and wait. Prey was supposed to run and scream and die. "Come on then," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent jungle. "Let us finish this." The Void Stalker attacked it, launched itself forward with all the speed and power that made its kind feared across the galaxy. Its limbs extended and its mouth opened to deliver a killing bite. Marcus moved not away, but forward and down, sliding under the creature's initial strike and slashing with his blade at the thin membrane connecting two of its front limbs. Void Stalker shrieked as purple blood sprayed from the wound, and it spun to attack again, only to find that the human had already moved to a different position. This pattern repeated. Again and again, the creature attacked and Marcus avoided while delivering small cuts that individually meant nothing but together began to slow the predators. Movements, blood loss, and confusion took their toll, and the Void Stalker's attacks became wilder and less coordinated then. Marcus triggered his trap. A vine he had positioned earlier snapped upward as the creature stepped on a concealed trigger, wrapping around two of its limbs and pulling them off balance at the same moment. A heavy branch he had weakened with careful cuts fell from above, striking the Void Stalker's back and driving it to the ground before the creature could recover. Marcus was on. I drove his blade into the base of its skull where the chitin was thinnest, pushing through with all his weight and all the strength that humans had developed over millions of years of evolution. The Void Stalker spasmed once, twice, and then went still. Marcus stood over the corpse of the apex predator, his chest heaving with exhaustion and his arms covered in purple blood that steamed in the cool jungle air. He remained there for a long moment, his eyes closed, before he pulled his blade free and began the walk back toward where he had sent the others. Gratham saw him first. The bear-like alien had been standing guard at the entrance to the rock formation, his weapon ready for an attack that he was sure would come. And when Marcus emerged from the jungle covered in blood and walking with the calm stride of someone returning from an evening stroll, Gratham felt his mind struggle to process what he was seeing. "The Void Stalker?" Gratham asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dead," Marcus replied simply, and he moved past the stunned alien to check on the wounded Novice. Talax stared at the human with wide eyes. His earlier arrogance completely vanished in the face of what had just happened. "How?" was all he could manage to say. Marcus did not answer. He was too busy applying field medicine to one of the wounded hunters whose leg had been badly torn. The emergency beacon brought guild wardens within hours, and the surviving novices were evacuated back to Carveth Station, while medical teams worked to save those who had been injured in the transport. No one spoke to Marcus directly, but everyone watched him with expressions that mixed awe with something very close to fear when they landed and the debriefing began. Each survivor told their version of events. Gratham described how Marcus had moved with the skill of a veteran apex hunter. Thalrix, humble beyond anything his prestigious family had ever prepared him for, admitted that the human had saved all of their lives. Even Sarah and Pock, who had fled in terror, returned to share what they had witnessed before running. The footage from their helmet cameras was reviewed by guild officials, and within hours it had reached the attention of Executor Veshtari herself. She watched the recording 3 times, her 4 hands gripping the edge of her desk with enough force to crack the surface. The human she had dismissed as worthless, the novice she had mocked and assigned to carry equipment, moved through that footage like death itself given form when the final image froze on Marcus standing over the dead Void Stalker. Veshtari felt something she had not experienced in over 200 years of service to the guild. She felt afraid in the Apex Council chamber. Croanax the Eternal played the same footage for his fellow hunters, while his scales flickered with colors that spoke of vindication and concern. The ghost of Kepler 442, he announced as the recording ended. That is what the colonists called him, and now you see why. Impressive, admitted Sirith from the shadows. For a human, you do not understand, Croanax said with a shake of his massive head. This was nothing compared to what he has done before. He pulled up files that had been buried deep in classified archives. Records that most of the council had never seen. 15 years on a Class 10 death world. Croanax continued as images filled the screens around them. He volunteered to protect the penal colony, and in that time he killed 3 creatures that the guild had officially classified as unkillable. The images showed monsters that made the void. Stalker looked tame things with too many teeth and not enough mercy. Predators that had claimed the lives of dozens of experienced alien hunters who had tried to match them. He disappeared from all records 3 years ago, Croanax finished. And now he appears here, registering as a novice and asking no special treatment. Zalanix the Bloodless leaned forward with cold interest in his eyes. The question is why? Zalanix said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. What is a killer of his caliber doing here? None of them had an answer, but all of them knew one thing for certain. The human they had dismissed as a novice was something far more dangerous. And whatever he was hunting, it was not thornbacks on a training world. Marcus was cleaning his gear in his small quarters when the door chimed to announce a visitor. He opened it to find Executor Veshtari standing in the corridor, her forearms clasped in front of her in a posture that he recognized as formal apology among her kind. "May I enter?" she asked, and her voice had lost all trace of the contempt she had shown during their first meeting. Marcus stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. The Crithian had to duck to fit through the doorway, designed for smaller species, and once inside she seemed to fill the entire room with her presence. "I have reviewed the footage from Novice 7, Veshtari began, her golden eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Marcus's shoulder. "And I have accessed records that should have been brought to my attention before you ever reached my desk." She paused, and Marcus saw her scales shift to several colors before settling on a deep blue that spoke of shame. "I called you weak," she continued. "I assigned you to carry equipment for hunters who could not have survived a single day on the world where you spent 15 years. Marcus remained silent, watching her without expression. "I wish to formally apologize for my error," Veshtari said, "and to offer you an immediate promotion to a rank more fitting your abilities." For a long moment, only the hum of the station systems broke the silence. Then Marcus smiled, not the easy smile he wore like armor, but something more genuine. "I appreciate the apology," he said, "but I would prefer to remain at my current rank for now." Veshtari's scales flickered with confusion. "I do not understand," she admitted. "Why would you choose to remain a novice when your skills clearly merit?" "Because I came here for a reason," Marcus interrupted gently. "And that reason requires me to move quietly through your organization." He offered nothing more. And after a moment, Veshtari nodded with the wisdom of someone who recognized that some questions were not meant to be answered. She left without another word, and Marcus returned to cleaning his gear with the careful attention of a man preparing for something difficult. 3 days later, he received an invitation that confirmed his suspicions about what was coming. The message arrived on official guild channels, stamped with seals that marked it as coming from the highest levels of the organization. Marcus Chen was being invited to participate in an Apex-level hunt on the Crucible 4. A novice to receive such an invitation was unprecedented. The document itself acknowledged this while praising his exceptional performance during the training. Mission Marcus read it twice, then set it aside and began preparing his equipment with renewed focus that evening. A knock on his door announced another visitor. This one was human commander David Thress had served with Marcus in the early days of humanity's expansion into the galaxy, and his weathered face showed the marks of decades spent in places where survival was never guaranteed. "You look terrible," Marcus said as he led his old friend inside. "You look like someone who is about to walk into a trap." Thress replied without humor, "Which is why I took emergency leave and traveled halfway across the galaxy to talk some sense into you." Marcus poured 2 drinks from a bottle he kept hidden in his pack and handed one to the commander. The invitation came from Zalanix the Bloodless. Thress continued after taking a long swallow. "One of the Apex Council members who sees you as a threat to his reputation. I know," Marcus said calmly. "He intends to kill you on that hunt and make it look like an accident. I know that too." Thress stared at his friend with frustration building in his eyes. "Then why are you going?" he demanded. "You could expose his plans, demand a formal investigation, or simply refuse the invitation without losing any standing." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his drink as memories played behind his eyes. "Do you remember Sarah?" he asked finally. Thress went still at the name. "Your hunting partner on Kepler 442, he said slowly. The one who died," Marcus finished. 3 years ago, on our last hunt together." He set down his drink and looked directly at his old friend. "There was a creature we had been tracking for months, something the colonists call the Orphan Maker because of what it did to the children it caught." Marcus continued in a voice that had gone flat and hard. "We finally cornered it in a canyon system near the northern glaciers." Thress listened without interrupting, recognizing the weight of confession in his friend's words. "Sarah was better than me in close quarters," Marcus said. "So she went in first while I covered the exits." He paused, and for just a moment the mask he wore cracked to show the pain beneath. "The creature was smarter than we thought. It had dug a tunnel we did not know about, and it came up behind her before I could reach her position." "Marcus," Thress began. "I heard her scream." Marcus continued as if he had not spoken. "And by the time I found her, there was nothing left to save." He stood and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. "The creature escaped that day, and I have been hunting it ever since," he said. 3 years of following rumors and tracking sightings across a dozen systems. And now I finally know where it is." Thress felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. "The Crucible," he said. "The Crucible," Marcus confirmed. "The most dangerous world in the galaxy, where the Guild sends its greatest hunters to prove themselves, and where the Orphan Maker has been spotted twice in the past month." He turned back to face his friend. "Zalanix's S-Trap is the only way I can get access to that planet without waiting years to reach Apex rank through official channels," Marcus explained. "So yes, I am walking into a trap. But I am also walking toward the thing I have been hunting since Sarah died." Thress finished his drink in one long swallow and stood. "You always were the most stubborn person I ever met," he said. "Human or otherwise, I made her a promise," Marcus replied simply, "and I intend to keep it." The 2 old friends stood in silence for a moment, sharing the weight of words unspoken. "What can I do?" Thress asked finally. "Make sure the Guild knows the truth if I do not come back," Marcus said. "About Zalanix, about what really happened on this hunt. About everything." Thress nodded and clasped his friend's shoulder. "Come back alive," he said. "That is an order." Marcus smiled that smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I will do my best." The day of the hunt arrived under dark skies. As the transport ship carried Marcus and a group of Apex-ranked hunters toward the Crucible's blood-red surface, a Cronax the Eternal sat across from him, the ancient reptile's eyes never leaving the human's face. "Zalanix means to kill you down there," Cronax said quietly. His words meant for Marcus alone. I cannot stop him without proof. But I wanted you to know that not all of us consider you an enemy." Marcus met the old hunter's gaze without flinching. "I have had worse things than Zalonyx hunting me," he replied. "But I appreciate the warning." Croanax made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You humans are either very brave or very foolish," he said. "I have not yet decided which. Perhaps both," Marcus suggested. The transport shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. And through the windows Marcus could see the surface of the Crucible rising to meet them, a world of red jungles and black mountains where even the plants had evolved to kill somewhere down there. Among the countless horrors that called this place home, waited the creature that had taken everything from him, and somewhere behind him, a cold-eyed hunter named Zalonyx was planning his death. Marcus checked his weapons one final time and prepared himself for what was coming. The hunt had finally begun. The Crucible lived up to its name from the moment Marcus set foot on its surface. The air itself seemed hostile, thick with spores that could paralyze the unwary, and heavy with the scent of decay from countless creatures that had died in the endless cycle of predation that defined this world. The hunting party consisted of 6 apex-ranked hunters plus Marcus, and their official mission was to track and eliminate a pack of netherwings flying predators that hunted in coordinated groups and had been terrorizing guild supply routes in the region. Zalonyx the Bloodless led the expedition with cold efficiency, issuing orders that consistently placed Marcus in the most dangerous positions while keeping himself safely surrounded by allies. Marcus accepted each assignment without complaint, using the opportunities to search for signs of the creature he had really come to find. Then the second day, he discovered tracks that made his blood run cold. The Orphan Maker had passed through this area less than a week ago, its distinctive 3-toed prints pressed deep into the red soil alongside the scattered bones of something that had not been fast enough to escape. Marcus memorized the direction of the tracks and continued with the group as if nothing had changed. That night, while the others slept, he slipped away to follow the trail. The jungle at night was a symphony of death screams and roars, echoed through the darkness as predators clashed and prey fled in desperate terror. But Marcus moved through it all with the silence he had learned in hotter places. He found more signs of his quarry as the hours passed, each one confirming that the Orphan Maker was close and hunting actively in this region. By dawn, he had returned to camp without anyone noticing his absence. But the knowledge burned in his chest like a fire waiting to be released. The confrontation with Zalonyx came on the third day. Hunting party had cornered a group of netherwings in a canyon, and Zalonyx ordered Marcus to flush them toward the waiting hunters, a task that would expose him to the full fury of the flying predators. With no support, Marcus began moving into position when alarms suddenly screamed from every hunter's equipment. Class 12. Threat detected. The automated warning announced in a calm voice that contrasted horribly with the words it spoke. All personnel advised to evacuate immediately. The Orphan Maker had found them. It emerged from the jungle like a nightmare, given flesh 12 meters of armored muscle and razor-sharp appendages, with a head that seemed to be nothing but teeth and eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. 3 of the apex hunters broke and ran immediately, their legendary courage meaning nothing against a creature that had killed hundreds of their kind. Across the Centauri, Eshelynx himself went pale as death and backed away with his weapons hanging forgotten at his sides. Only Croanax held his ground, the ancient reptile's scales flickering through colors that spoke of fear but also determination. And Marcus walked toward the creature. "Human," Croanax shouted. "What are you doing? That thing will kill you." "Probably," Marcus agreed without stopping. "But it killed someone I loved. I made a promise." The Orphan Maker noticed his approach and turned its massive head to focus on the small figure moving against all logic. and survival instinct it made a sound that might have been confusion in all its centuries of existence. Prey had never willingly approached it. Before Marcus drew his weapons and began to run, followed was not a fight. It was a war the orphan maker struck with speed that should have been impossible for something so large. And Marcus dodged by margins so thin that its claws tore his clothing without touching skin. He struck back with blade and explosive charges, targeting joints and sensory organs with the precision of someone who had studied every available record of this creature's anatomy. The battle raged across the jungle as predator and prey traded roles. Again and again Marcus used every trick he had learned in 15 years on Kepler 442, leading the creature into traps, an ambush that slowed it down without stopping it. Completely hours passed. The twin suns of the Crucible crossed the sky as the two combatants clashed and separated. And clashed again. Marcus took wounds, a gash across his ribs, a deep cut on his left arm, bruises and burns from near misses with the creature's acid-laced attacks. But he refused to fall. The orphan maker was bleeding too. Its armored hide cracked in a dozen places where Marcus's explosives had found their marks. Finally, as the suns began to set and exhaustion threatened to claim them both, Marcus saw his opportunity. A volcanic vent opened in the ground nearby, spewing heat and toxic gases into the air, and he led the creature toward it with the last of his strength. The orphan maker charged, sensing that its prey was weakening, and Marcus planted himself directly in front of the vent with nowhere left to run at the last possible moment. He threw himself aside and triggered every remaining explosive he carried. Blast caught the creature mid-leap and hurled it backward into the vent, where superheated gases and molten rock welcomed it with deadly embrace. The orphan maker screamed a sound that would haunt Marcus's nightmares for the rest of his life, and thrashed as it tried to escape the burning pit. Marcus crawled to the edge and looked down at the dying creature. "That was for Sarah," he whispered, and the words carried all the weight of 3 years of grief and hunting and determination. The creature's struggles weakened and finally stopped, and the jungle fell silent as if the world itself was holding its breath. Marcus collapsed onto his back and stared at the darkening sky, his body broken, but his promise finally fulfilled. He did not know how long he lay there before Zalanix appeared. The cold-eyed hunter stood over him with a medical kit in his hands, and his expression was something Marcus had never expected to see on that face. "Respect. I watched everything," Zalanix said quietly as he began treating Marcus's wounds. "I came here planning to let you die, but what I saw instead." He paused, and for a moment, the mask of the bloodless slipped to reveal something more human beneath. "No being in the galaxy has ever killed an orphan maker alone," Zalanix continued. "What you did should have been impossible." Marcus said nothing, too exhausted and too empty for words. "I have been a fool," Zalanix admitted, "and I nearly became a murderer because my pride could not accept that a human might be my equal." The rescue team arrived an hour later, led by Croanax and the hunters who had fled when the creature first appeared. They found Zalanix still treating Marcus's wounds, and the story of what had happened spread through their ranks like wildfire within days. The entire guild knew the human novice, the one that Executor Veshtari had dismissed as worthless, had killed the orphan maker alone by the time Marcus was well enough to attend the formal guild assembly. Every hunter on Carva's station had heard some version of the tale. He stood before the Apex Council while Veshtari herself read the official declaration for exceptional valor, unprecedented skill, and the elimination of a Class 12 threat that has plagued this galaxy for over 800 years. The Galactic Hunters Guild hereby bestows upon Marcus Chun of Earth the rank of Apex Hunter, with all rights and privileges thereof. The chamber abutted in cheers that shook the walls. But Marcus barely heard them when the council offered him a permanent seat among their ranks. He declined with the same quiet smile he had worn since first arriving at this station. "I came here to keep a promise," he explained. "And now that it is done, I have no more need for hunting." Croanax nodded with understanding that came from 6 centuries of life. "What will you do now?" The ancient hunter asked. "Go home," Marcus replied. "Find some peace if I can," on the day he left. A small crowd gathered to see him off. Gratham was there. The bear-like alien who had been the first to see what Marcus truly was, Veshtari, stood nearby, her scales shifting through colors that spoke of admiration and regret. Even Zelenix came. Offering a formal bow that acknowledged the debt between them, Croanax walked Marcus to his ship and stopped at the boarding ramp. "Your species is young in the stars," the ancient reptile said, "but we will not make the mistake of underestimating you again." Marcus paused and looked back at the gathered hunters, beings from dozens of worlds who had once mocked humans as weak and worthless. "Good," he said, with that small smile finally reaching his eyes. "We would hate to have to keep proving ourselves." He boarded his ship and flew toward Earth, leaving behind a galaxy that had learned an important lesson and across known space. The Guild quietly updated its species threat assessment. Humans were reclassified from Class 3, Moderate, to Class 7, Extreme Caution Required, because the most dangerous predators were not always the largest or the strongest. Sometimes they were the ones who walked quietly, carried simple weapons, and never stopped until the hunt was done.